Hey everybody, thought I'd do a quick video on the 2003 Cobra that I'm currently building. I get a lot of questions on Instagram on why I don't do any videos for YouTube during the build. Honestly, just don't really have the time to do it. So thought I would just do one video kind of highlighting a lot of the work that I've done over the past 6 months on the car. Just to kind of bring up the speed on where it is before I go ahead and put everything back together and cover up a lot of the work. So you can just kind of see maybe an idea of how I ran stuff. Some of it you might really like, some of it you might not like. So really just for educational purposes, just for people to get an idea of maybe the way you might want to build your car. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. So at the shop, got the orange car here today, and then the black car. Let's get a better view. Goal really was just to clean up the engine bay as much as possible and make the motor as functional and as pretty as possible. So car is filthy, but let's go ahead and start with the trunk. Battery's wired up, got a on and off kill switch, as you can see. Got a P&R 8-gallon tank for the heat exchanger and intercooler. You have your return, you have your feed, little on off basically to purge any of the fluid that's in there. Everything's hooked up to these two relays. One relay is for the Rule 3000 pump in here. This one is for the Magna Fuel 750 that is underneath this back bumper for the fuel system. So future plans are to finish the trunk out, build a nice enclosure for a sub and an amp, and just really just finish out the trunk just so it looks as factory as possible with a giant tank and a battery box, I guess, back there. One of my favorite views really is the rear of the car. I mean, you have those 335s on the CCWs with that Glenn's Performance polished out sump tank with the lines for your feed and your return coming off of it. Probably definitely one of my favorite features. But going back up to the front of the car, can't go over everything, but I'll just hit some of the highlights. Motor was out of a wrecked 04 Cobra. That car was pretty built from the receipts that I found on the car. All forged internals, small stroker kit, ARP, everything. Has the equivalent of, I would say, comp stage 2 cams, ported heads, you name it. So really just disassembled that entire motor, powder coated every single part you could possibly think of, or had it polished. Some of the highlights are obviously removing the battery from this area, removing your fuse box. I moved the fuse box right down here, and then getting rid of your power steering reservoir right here and swapping it over here. That was actually pretty easy. Just had to have some custom tabs made, reran the wiring, and then had some high pressure lines made over here and ran them inside the fender well just to clean up all those hard lines that would have been running in the front. Cooling system wise, we got a GT500 heat exchanger with the fans, MAF crash bar to hold that thing in, all bolt up, super easy. Fluidine, radiator, stock fan, MMR, a lot of MMR on the car as well. I have the crossover delete, oil pump inside, guides. Down here you can see the Innovations West dampener with the Metco ring, thump tensioner, Metco pulleys. This guy's running a 3.1 and I believe it's a 4-pound lower. So might have to switch that to a 2. Have to see how the tune goes on that. But a lot of work on fuel system itself. All PTFE with a lot of 4 parts, 4 regulator and Magna Fuel pump. Also put in these nice Scott Rod panels on each side. Had this guy custom made. There's no mass air sensor because everything is basically run off of a map sensor, so you don't need it anymore because we're running MS3 in the car. Cleaning up everything back here. Try to tuck and hide as much of the wiring as possible, just to really keep the car super clean. Have to run all the vacuum lines still and hook up a couple things, but you get the general idea. Got your Maximum Motorsports caster camber plates, Maximum Motorsports clutch cable, steering shaft still has to go in, Maximum Motorsports coilovers, and then once I get the car on the lift, I'll show you all the Maximum Motorsports parts underneath, K-member and all. But for the fuel system, Let's go ahead actually and put the car on the lift. Probably be easier to show you that way. Sure we get this guy in the locks. All right. So underneath, polished IRS, had the gas tank covered in carbon fiber. You can see my dash 10 feed line from the tank hitting a 100 filter, MagnaFuel 750, a 10 post filter, and then we got this guy running all the way to the front, and you got your return right there. Tank polished up really nice. I think it should look good with the exhaust behind it from the road. CCW Twisted Classics with 335 Toyos on the rear, just like the orange car. Rear end, I had the whole rear I did last year, the whole IRS, complete FTBR kit, bushings, diff cover, brace, I mean, you name it. Still have to install the mufflers. But going up, you can see we have a Cook's H-pipe, X-pipe, and then you have the Cook's long tube headers. You can see the back of the whole Maximum Motorsports K-members, arms, my Bilsteins, not Bilsteins, the Conies, the yellow adjustables. That's what replaced my Bilsteins. You can also see under here, let's see, we have the Stifler's drive shaft loop. I have Stifler's subframe connectors. Still have to put in the Stifler's fit system, but waiting to get all this mocked up, like finished, before putting that in, just to make sure it's exactly where I want it to be. But let's go ahead and hit the coolant side. Out of that tank, you can see in the trunk, you got a feed and a return, and then you got my power wire for the battery itself. So you got your feed and return, driving all the way down the driver's side. It's basically coming up, comes around and through, all the way through to here. One goes up into the intercooler, comes out of the intercooler, comes back into the heat exchanger. Then from the heat exchanger, shoots all the way back around into the tank again. Go ahead and follow the fuel lines. The way I ran the fuel lines, I ran them on the opposite side, basically coming up the same exact way. I got a dash 10 feed and dash 6 return. The dash 10 feed splits off into two dash 8s, and each one of these goes to each side of the fuel injector, the fuel rails for the fuel injectors, running those 1080, 1050X ID fuel injectors in there. So those go up, they hit the lines, it comes back off of the backs of the fuel rails onto these two lines. These two, one goes in this side, one goes in this side of the regulator, and then my return is sent all the way back. I picked that spot for the regulator just because it's away from the heat. It just seemed like a really good spot for it. So hopefully I still think that after a little while of driving the car. CCRM, hid that back in there. That was my buddy Steven's idea. You can see the coilovers. Let's go to suspension-wise. I mean, all Maximum Motorsports K-members. The K-member, you got the arms, Maximum Motorsport bump steer kit, Maximum Motorsport, pretty much everything. Really happy with how all of that came together. Some of the other parts you can see in here on the Cook's headers, got those nice locking nuts on there so those don't back out. Let's see, we got my Nations alternator right here, if the light's not too bright. Little Metco parts, everything powder coated. Over here you have everything I could think of is either braided and switched to AN. Anything that I couldn't really is just for like power steering, ran that rubber in some of these coolant lines just because it didn't really make sense since you don't really see it. But coming off the top, the 2 high pressure hoses, that's where I got a lot of questions. One of these high pressure hoses goes right into the pump, and then the other one goes onto the top of the steering rack. I got another low pressure one coming all the way over here into the cooler for the power steering. And then it comes off, goes back up to the reservoir, and then this one goes back into the booster itself. So you can see all the long tubes in there. Nice Canton oil tank, oil pan, oil tank. Yeah, starter, just a lot of relocation stuff. Pretty busy in some spots, but really tried to do the best I could to hide everything. Brembo brake conversion I did last year from the Cobra R. Super happy with that kit. And just kind of a brief overview of where we are. Hopefully we'll get a chance to start this thing maybe in the next couple days. And the goal is to hopefully drive it to Mustang Week. So, hey, you never know. Well, I appreciate you checking out the video. If you have any questions, comments, always welcome and love it. Appreciate all my followers. Thank you for everything. Take care.